Can we bring that board up again and do a little bit of analysis, because that knight e4 move was so cheeky by Maxime Vachier-Lagrave. I know he lost the game, but it is so easy to miss this checkmate configuration. If you go c1 equals queen, knight f6 check, king f8, and queen g8 is mate. The bishop could never take the knight. It was pinned. That was a devilish try by the Frenchman with 3 names.
But queen d4, such a calm defensive move in no time. Magnus realizes that these checks on the 8th rank are not dangerous because the king can just escape either to d7 or, as in the game, to f7. The guy is totally unstoppable. Doesn't matter how much time he has. Doesn't matter how tricky you are. When he gets into these zones, I mean, say your prayers. Say your prayers because you're down by 4. And this is a pivotal game, Robert. Back we go to the live board.
Back we go, and Magnus Carlsen with a knight on b5, a bishop on f4, and black just played the move c7 to c5, striking in the center. So this has been Maxime's idea throughout. He's just like, I don't like to play these passive positions. Let me get a little bit more active. But that knight on b5, Danya, such a thorn in black's side. Not only can it go to c7 if your knight on a6 moves, but if your rook moves, it just gobbles up the a7 pawn. Thank you very much.
Oh my gosh. And normally in these positions, you see sometimes black playing knight b4, ultimately trying to get a6 in, but MVL going bishop c6 and queen d7. Ultimately, you're going to have to solve the problem of that knight. Perhaps black could even consider c4 to cut off the connection between the bishop and the knight. And sometimes white just leaves the knight on b5 and sacrifices that pawn. And that might be what Magnus is intending here against c4.
I think c4 can be met by rook f1 to b1. Say, please.
Fantastic move.
Rook f1, it was e4, just strikes in the center. He's just trying to collapse black's pawn structure, but rook fb1 at the same point. Here, if d takes e4, thank you very much for the pawn on c4. If you take on b5 twice, you're going to be in some trouble, because now I have a light square bishop. You have a weak pawn on b3. You have a weak pawn on b7. Your knight on a6 is just awkwardly placed. So this is looking really bad for Maxime, and he desperately needs this one. He is down 4 points. He cannot keep losing.
God, it seems that he's just playing natural moves in this game, and he's already much worse, staring down the barrel of what could be a 5-point lead. This will be the last game, most likely, of the 5-minute segment, unless Magnus wins this quickly, which is looking pretty likely right now. He's got a big advantage in the endgame just because his pieces are so well placed, and black's position is riddled with holes and weaknesses and deficiencies. How bad is it, Robert? I don't think it's actually that bad.
But what a move that was, because the knight on a6 is loose. Knight d4 looks like a double attack, but the bishop would safely slide back to b7 to defend. And as you're pointing out, a5, that's the principled approach. When you have pawns on b6 and 8 and g6, fianchetto structures, you want to use your rook pawn because you can develop your rook in its place. I know so many people would say, let me go rook a1 to d1. No, your rook on f1 might go to d1, and your a5 push allows your rook on a1 to say, oh, this open file is going to be beneficial for me.
Magnus spoiled for choice, and one thing that we have been highlighting, yet another ace on upon Magnus's sleeve, is the fact that he knows exactly when to pause. He just played 5-6 moves really quickly. They were natural moves. Now he senses that the structure has transformed, and he needs to act precisely in order to keep the fire of the initiative burning, and that's precisely what he's doing. He hasn't hesitated, Robert, at times to take even 2 minutes, if that's what the position requires.
No, it is kind of funny that happens. And right now, a5 looks so obvious. So I wonder what is the drawback of that move.
I think knight c5 might hold things together for black.
Oh,
so I was thinking about a sack on a7.
That looks very adventurous. Also, he might be considering the move b2 to b4, just to say, your knight on a6, where exactly is that going? Not to c5 anymore.
Immediately b4.
Yeah, right now.
To restrict the knight. Love that move. And then the knight could drop back to d4 in the event the black tries to trade the knights off. It's in white's advantage to keep as many minor pieces on the board here as possible.
Magnus thinking, deliberating. We've talked about a series of moves. Knight d4, pawn a5, pawn b4, even rook f to d1. So which one will Magnus choose? That's the big question right now. And for Maxime, this knight on a6, that is not a good knight. Knights on the rim are dim, and this one,
it's a good morning.
Doesn't look very good. Nice. Well played. Good pun.
Psych. Thank you. Well, it's a pretty good pawn on a5, which Magnus has finally put there about a minute later than we thought he would. And I'm pretty sure that knight c5, is what he was thinking, intercepting the connection between the bishop and b6.
Oh, there still might be b4 pushes after knight to c5, right? Just give me the pawn on b6. He goes knight to d4. Oh, and a bishop b7. There might be a6. And then knight c6 and bishop d5, things like that.
He is an artist. Bishop b7. I'll show this on the analysis board. Let's bring it up quickly. Automatic move, right? Looks like black is fine. a6. No, black is not fine. Drop the bishop back. And is white now going to go after this e4 pawn? No. Knight c6, and you can resign. This is a forkaruski. And you're also forking the a7 pawn. That's how close black is to collapse right now. And we're getting something similar in the game, Robert. Maxime drops the bishop back to d7 to control the c6 square, but in comes Magnus's bishop anyway. And here comes the rook.
Yeah, give me the a file. The f7 pawn is tender. The bishop on d5, dominating the bishop on d7. The rook on a7, the best rook on the board. And bishop b8. Look at that move from Maxime. A retreating move, but the rook cannot stay on the 7th rank. That was huge.
That was huge, and Magnus missed that move. He might have forgotten that the bishop was defended. That knight on c5 is the hero of black's position, but it's not the end of the world for Magnus. When you're this well-placed, you can afford to spend a tempo or two. That's not what Magnus was looking for.
Although, look at the control. The board's fully open file. D file is open, but there are minor pieces there. The A file is completely Magnus for the taking. But this is one of those positions, Danya, where it's aesthetically pleasing. We love the look of the rooks. Great. How do we win this game? What's the target? Will we play b4 at some point to kick the knight away and go after b6? What is the plan?
It's all about carving infiltration squares. A retreating knight move is on the menu, and the b6 pawn is on the menu as well.
And knight takes b2. That pawn is hanging, but c3 is not, because the bishop can slide back to d4 with check, and then the knight can go to c5 even for white, and all of a sudden white's pieces are jumping forward. It's looking awfully unpleasant for Maxime.
But how exactly does Magnus coordinate his pieces? Can he hunt for the knight on b4? Okay, bishop covers the check. Rook infiltrates to a7. Threats by the base in full. And this is looking nasty for the Frenchman with 3 names.
Bishop takes d4. Rook takes d7. All of a sudden the f7.
Oh.
Can you get away with this?
Rook d7. Bishop c3.
Rook takes f7. That looks so scary.
And then you can double on the 7th rank, and normally that spells trouble. Robert, maybe black can park the king on h6 and go rook h8, and there was something there that Magnus didn't like.
Well, maybe he just wants to double his rooks anyway. Rook b7 next, hitting the knight on b2, then rook a1 to a7. Give me the 7th rank. Give me the f7 pawn, and the bishop can't really move from d7. There's not a safe square on the board, and, well, f7 would fall right away.
And the pressure has reached a zenith. It looks like MVL can hold things together according to the eval bar, but neither of the players knows what the evaluation is. There's tactics everywhere. Rook e7 maybe was the move, but there were knight c6 related problems. MVL defending from behind.
So rook b7, what is the drawback? Is there some kind of maybe temporary piece sacrifice of rook takes c3 and rook d3, something like that? At least when you see pieces in the same line, there's a rook ready to meet them. And this, by the way, is the final game of the 5+1 time segment.
It's official. The problem with rook takes c3 and rook d3 is that there's knight c6, but I know you were just illustrating the concept. Maybe you can drop the bishop back to e8 at some point. Not as long as the rook is on the 7th rank, because then you're running into knight e6 check. But when you got this amount of tactics, it's just so easy to blunder. And Magnus just keeps intensifying and keeps tightening the screws. Can he convert this into the full point, though?
Here comes rook d6.
Rook takes c3. Okay, and the knight drops back for defense.
Okay, he goes to c5 to protect e4 and the bishop all at once. That's good news. But what's black's next move? Can black actually make a single move?
I think bishop e8 might be possible since e6 is now protected.
Oh, good point. So can you play c4 to protect your bishop? And then once bishop e8 is played, you swap rooks, play rook c7 to get rid of that knight.
Great call, and that's exactly what the doctor ordered. Oh, gosh, this is so hard to defend.
King f8, rook f6. So you can't really move your king. Rook moves from c8 to b8. There might already be knight c6 tactics to distract the bishop and win the f7 pawn. This looks really tough for black. I feel like it's the Zugzwang.
I feel like this is the point in the game where the players are going to go like h5, h4, and then MVL is going to start thinking again.
Just throw in just any old move because you don't have many.
You don't, and you can see MVL taking his time. He's still a minute up on the clock, but you're not going to win the game just with a time advantage. We have seen Magnus handle these endgames exquisitely, even with 2 seconds on the clock, much less 20.
Is knight c6 a threat in some positions, right? If bishop takes, rook takes f7 check, and then you win a pawn. So he goes king h8, giving up the f7 pawn, and that's the best move, apparently.
Bishop takes h3 maybe in response.
Okay, bishop h3 is possible, but then there's oh wow, I guess you get away with it. I think rook trade on d8 and knight c6
Bishop
be
d5.
rook d1 check. So he goes bishop d5 back. The king on h8, by the way, might get checkmated. If your knight can hop around to g5, then you're delivering a mate.
Yeah, you're hanging by a thread if you're Maxime, but we got to take our hats off. Maxime is doing a phenomenal job of holding this together, and so far he has repelled every one of Magnus's attempts. He might go back to b8. Bishop takes c4 is on the docket here as well.
If your rook moves off the back rank, then rook c7, and your knight is overloaded. It gets kicked off c5. You lose the bishop on d7. So the rook has to stay in contact with the c8 square if you're Maxime.
Can Magnus get him down on the clock? I think if Maxime has 10 seconds here, he doesn't survive, and that's what it's heading toward. Every single move, Maxime has to avoid 600 different tactics and blunders.
King g3, and maybe g5 just to keep the king out. He goes e3 here. Wow, because rook takes e3 is check.
Wait, e2, knight takes e2? But now the pawn trade is obviously in black's favor. The knight can re-maneuver to e5, but then the c-pawn is going to hurtle forward toward promotion.
Yeah, just move your king away. Watch out for knight e5 to g4, by the way. That was almost checkmate. Knight e5 to g4 could be a checkmate threat.
Magnus backpedaling. I think MVL is the closest he has been all endgame long to making the draw.
He is, for sure. And if Magnus isn't careful, 3 seconds, by the way, he could find himself victim to some kind of attack.
Oh, I think rook c5 forces it, and we're going to get a liquidation here. Oh my gosh, what a defensive effort by Maxime. He's still down by 4. But that was an important game to not lose, a very important game to hold.
And that was extremely impressive. I think that most anyone would have lost that position. He showed Hikaru Nakamura a level of defense there.
Mm-hmm. He most certainly did, and at this point, neither side can make any progress, so a draw is imminent.
And it is the final game of the 5+1, so it's not like they're wasting time for anything. They're just making a draw by repetition.